First of all, if you're racking your brain wondering how you missed the PvP ranking system in Elden Ring, you didn't. The leaderboard I'm referring to is part of the Elden Ring PvP Discord, something I absolutely recommend joining if you're at all interested in PvP. There's thousands of players, endless resources for build making, and if you're looking to put your skills to the test, ranked leaderboards for all platforms. Especially if you're on Xbox like me, I would love to see new faces posting challenges on the leaderboard. Alright, enough with the sales pitch. For the actual meat of this video, I'm going to be going over the builds I used all the way from unranked to reaching Elden Lord. Before I go into it, I just want to say I chose my wording very carefully. Notice how I said number 1 ranked player, not the best player. I don't think I'm the most knowledgeable or mechanically talented player on the platform. It's just that, as of now, I do technically have that number 1 next to my name, so take that as you will. I'm basically just taking this as an excuse to hopefully make an interesting video for people interested in ranked. The Xbox leaderboard is sadly not as populated as PlayStation, and not nearly as populated as PC, so in a way it's the easiest one to push in, and in a way it's also hard because it can be difficult to get matches at all sometimes. Hopefully telling a bit of the story about how I got to number 1 can inspire you guys to try out leaderboard for yourself. Everyone is unranked at some point, and when you're not really sure what you're doing, taking your first ranked match can be a bit intimidating. My very first match happened to be against the number 8 ranked player, and I went into that match on my Dex Arcane build with 38 poise and a Morgoth's Cursed Sword. Call it beginner's luck, but I was actually able to win that fight, and since the leaderboard operates on an elo system where you get more points as the difference between you and the opponent above you increases, that shot me straight from unranked to 17th place. I think this makes climbing the leaderboard a lot less daunting since you don't have to make glacial progress moving up just a few ranks at a time. Alright, so I was feeling good, just maybe I can survive this ladder in my lightweight armor and lack of meta knowledge. I went right into my next challenge, this time against the number 6 ranked player, and was promptly reality checked. My Morgoths had yet to let me down, but this time I was going against a full mage with a lot more challenges won on the ladder. It was my first look at a truly optimized mage build, and I lost pretty convincingly. So it was a bit of a wake-up call that I was in fact going to have to up my game and look into optimizing my dual build. At that time I only had one character at 125, which is the required level for the leaderboard. Being on console means that creating new characters is not so simple. I honestly feel like that's quite a barrier for new players getting into competitive, since usually people end their first playthroughs higher than 125, and the idea of starting from scratch can be a little overwhelming. Don't let the idea of creating a new build intimidate you too much though. You'll need to collect a lot of key items which can be time consuming, but the community on Discord as well as in the Patches Emporium Reddit can be a huge help for getting things like runes and weapons that can save you a ton of time. For Ranked Build 2.0, I wanted something with a lot more potential. I had some experience with Storm Stomp and found it to be quite good, so I knew I wanted to use that, and for the weapon to put it on, I decided to go with the Knight Rider Glaive. It has S strength scaling when heavy infused, so it can take good advantage of the two-handing bonus on a strength build, and that was going to allow me to have pretty minimal investment to reach an effective 80 strength, which then meant I could dump a ton of points into endurance. This level of endurance is pretty excessive, but I just didn't see the value of putting it into strength for a few more AR points, and my endurance being this high meant that I could run all the armor and tools that I wanted without even having to use the Great Jar Talisman. For my talisman setup, I was using either Ritual Shield or Crimson Amber in the first slot, then Erdtree's Favor, Bullgoat, and Blue Feathered Branch Sword. At some point in a fight, I always like to swap out my first slot to something like the Blessed Dew Talisman, since once you've been damaged, those other talismans become useless. Of course, the Branch Sword isn't doing anything while I'm at max HP, but since I have such high endurance, I sort of have a free slot for this, and it's pretty nice to not have to worry about swapping into it once I'm low HP. There are a lot of rules to abide by to participate in Ranked, so if you're wondering why I'm not taking advantage of certain items, it might be because there's a rule against it. I was rocking 99 poise, which is the maximum that you're allowed to reach, and I did it while wearing most of the armor that I already enjoyed, which was nice. I also decided to put my equip load, and the fact that I was two-handing to use, and decided to throw the Twin Bird Kite Shield on my back. This thing gives you a 5% boost to attack and 10% to defense when you're below 20% HP, and it happens to stack with the Blue Feathered Branch Sword, which made it easily worth wearing to me. I collected consumables like fan daggers and boiled crab, and then I was nearly ready to go back to Ranked. The last thing I need to mention is Physic Tiers, and more like Physic Tier, honestly, because the Crimson Bubble Tier is a must-have on Ranked Ladder. That's the tier that heals you for 30% HP when dropping below 20%, and it's certainly something that I wasn't going back into competitive without. This was the build that I won my next 20 or so matches with, some losses in between of course, but I was loving the Storm Stomp halberd, and it was allowing me to take on the top players with confidence. I'd grown super used to it, and I managed to get all the way to rank 8 with plenty of motivation for pushing to number 1 to spare. At this point I got to experience the first dramatic change to the ladder rule set. The rules are generally based on the consensus of the top players and admin, and are implemented in favor of balance, and while it wasn't something I totally agreed with, Storm Stomp was banned. This was also when I realized how lopsided the Xbox leaderboard was. I'll just give you an example of the point distribution as it stands right now, which is 870 points for number 13 and 2,000 points for number 1. Breaking into the top 25 and even the top 10 isn't too difficult, but with rank 8 being over 300 points behind rank 7, and rank 7 being 400 points short of rank 1, I wasn't going to be able to slide into first place without finding another build that I liked just as much. I did some experimenting on a dex build rather than strength, and quickly realized that spinning slash on a Nagakiba was something pretty menacing. I talk about it more in my top 5 Ashes of War video, but essentially it does really high poise damage, hits super hard, and has plenty of range and speed to make it useful. I went with a lightning infusion on it, and decided since I liked the one-handed moveset more anyways, that it would be worth it to run an S-stock in my offhand. Off-stock is a term you've surely heard if you're in the Discord, and it's a pretty powerful roll catch tool to keep in the offhand. I didn't have as high endurance on this build, so I did have to use the Great Jar Talisman, which basically just meant that my first talisman swap would be directly to the Branch Sword. I loved this build, and climbed to 4th place with it I believe, but I was starting to struggle against certain builds. This time it wasn't a ban list that prompted me to try out new things, but essentially just a need to figure out decent counters for mage builds. As usual, my experimenting started out with an Ash of War, one that's perfect for punishing casts and FP flasks, and that's Beast Roar. I stayed on my dex build, now using a Keen Broadsword in my main hand and a Lightning Noble's Slender Sword in my left. I even decided to use the Roar Medallion over Crimson Amber or Ritual Shield, just to have that high damaging punish potential right off the bat. It worked, and I was no longer at the mercy of certain spells, and was able to reach 2nd place on the ranked ladder. This is where I have to give a huge shout out to the number 1 ranked player, who was literally ranked 1 on both Xbox and PlayStation for a while. It's so easy just to sit on your points or continue to challenge low risk opponents on Xbox right now, but Pale Drake King basically went out of his way to make sure he wasn't doing that. He was super helpful and friendly, just great sportsmanship in general. If any of you guys join the ladder, definitely take any chance you can to play against him. Same actually goes for lots of the other players on the ladder. Billy the Kid, Peevil, PBMF, Frost Greatsword Abuser, they're the kinds of player to drop you half their fan daggers at the start of the match when you forget to buy some, speaking from experience. At number 2, I was loving the off-stock Nagakiba and double straight sword builds, but to make that final push to number 1, I changed it up one last time. It was back to my tried and true Knight Rider Glaive on the strength build, this time with Flaming Strike. With Storm Stomp being gone, Flaming Strike sort of became the new king, and putting it to use on a halberd is very strong to put it lightly. With now almost 50 matches under my belt, and only 11 points away from Elden Lord, I went into my last match against Pale Drake King. It was a super fun halberd mirror match, and watching a clip back, I realized how close I was to walking backwards right off the cliff, which would have been pretty hilarious. Moment of truth, and only 11 points needed. Almost. So back into the gauntlet for a few more matches. I was then only 3 points away from that magical 2000, and just like that, Elden Lord. Pale was as humble as ever, of course, and he wasn't even using his main build against me in that final match. And now 6 days later, I'm still hanging on to that number 1 spot for now. Who knows with the rule changes and how much time I'll be putting into leaderboard if I'll be able to keep it for very long, but I thought it would be fun to share the story nonetheless. Seriously, if you're on Xbox, or any other platform for that matter, as sweaty or tryhardy as ranked PvP might appear, it's all in good fun in the end, and I highly encourage trying it out. There's tons of knowledgeable people to answer your questions in the Discord, so don't let any lack of meta knowledge deter you too much. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, I would massively appreciate you hitting subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.